Hello, thank you everyone for taking the time to watch our video class today, going over the guidelines for renting rooms and home sharing when you rent out a room in your own personal primary residence. We're going to be covering laws, exemptions, special rules, best practices for both the rental properties within the city limits of Portland as well as what applies throughout the entire state. This is brought to you by myself and rpmeducation.org, or Real Estate and Property Management Education, and is paid for and free for you guys to watch. Is paid for by a grant from the City of Portland through the Portland Housing Bureau. My name is Christian Bryant. If you don't know me, I'm an experienced Portland and Greater Oregon landlord and educator of landlords. I've been educating landlords, teaching classes like this going on, I think, about 15 plus years now, and right since around like 2000, sometime between 2008 to 2010, I think I taught my first class. Been managing property as a principal broker since then in the greater Willamette Valley, Portland Metro, as far south as Salem, Corvallis, Albany, as well as over in Central Oregon and Bend. And through that's through my management company, Northwest RPM, or Northwest Real Estate and Property Management. And I'm also president of the Portland Area Rental Owners Association, and one of my favorite new projects, which you'll get to meet him a little bit later in the class, producer of Mr. Portland Landlord YouTube channel, which is a lot of just free information for good landlording advice. Excuse me. My specialization, as I said, is in the Portland Metro, Greater Willamette Valley, as well as Central Oregon. As far as like the Portland Metro goes, I was actually co-chair of the Rental Services Committee for its entirety. So some of the things we'll be talking about today, like the City of Portland F.A.I.R Ordinance and the relocation fee, I was heavily involved in the conversations and debates that went on during that time. So I'm pretty intimately involved with understanding those laws. Excuse me, sorry. Couple quick disclaimers. This class is current as of February 2026. Obviously, throughout the year, City of Portland, State of Oregon, technically even on the federal level, they could update and change laws. So I'll give you some resources towards the end of this class so that you can know where to go to be able to actually stay up on those things. Because if you're going to dive into being a landlord, especially if this is your first, time dipping your toe in that water, one of the things that you do need to learn is it's not a passive activity. If you are managing your own property, which I assume you'll be managing the rooms that you rent out in your own home, it is something where at the very least you need to put a regular effort into staying up to date and educated on laws and rules as they change. General education, not legal counsel. I always put this out there. I am not an attorney. I do wear a lot of hats that makes me have a good understanding of all the laws that do apply. Of course, I've had the slide content and everything approved by all those that be. But I am still not an attorney, so I'm not giving any legal advice, nor are we establishing any kind of attorney-client relationship today. I always like to point out, though, for landlords out there, take the opportunity, treat knowing what attorneys in the counties where you have rental properties, treat knowing who they are like the emergency plumbers in the area. Do the research now, know who they are, save their contact info, and stash it away somewhere important and hope that you never ever have to use them, just like that emergency plumber. If something comes up, and not necessarily that it's already escalated to a lawsuit, it's just a unique scenario that may not be specifically considered or dealt with in the law, and all the research you do up to that point, it might actually be worth it to get an official legal opinion on your scenario, just to make sure you're treating your tenant properly as far as the law is concerned. You're not accidentally putting yourself at risk. So hopefully you never need them, just like that emergency plumber, but it's good to do the research now and just know who they are. There are variable laws across cities. Today I'm covering what is at the state level, which governs everything throughout the entire state, as well as any Portland specific laws. Places like Eugene, Bend have kind of started dipping their toe into passing some of their own landlord tenant laws. So I definitely encourage you, if you're outside of the city of limits of Portland, do some extra research on any local laws that might apply. Why rent a room or share a home, or share your home, I should say? What are the benefits and trends? Advantages, some call it house hacking, where you own and live in the place, and then you rent out the rooms to help pay for the mortgage and expenses. But renting out rooms or ADU can offset mortgage costs, generate income, and maximize property utility for owner occupants. Market trends and demand. It's no surprise to anyone. It's no secret. Housing has been a hot button issue in not just the Portland Metro, but throughout Oregon. And anything we can do to increase the number of units we have within the current stock that is built is going to benefit everybody. Might put a little extra money in your pocket as an owner or landlord, and having rooms to rent does feed a need. Is kind of a lower entry level, let's say, cost for a tenant that wants to be able to live on their own, support themselves. Excuse me. And a lot of stuff that we're going to cover today: legal exemptions and considerations. The law also understands that, or the lawmakers over the years, I should say, have understood that if you are renting out a room in your own home, it is a very different situation than if you were to, say, rent out that rental property unit across town, or even just completely separated from you, or even in the same building, just its own separate unit. You're sharing your living room, your kitchen with these people, and so there are exemptions to certain laws that we're going to cover today that helps to make it unknown that we do recognize that and give you a little extra wiggle room, leeway, let's say, to if you're renting out rooms in your own property. One thing that's not on here that I thought of, and as I was creating this class, is there's also a bit of a loneliness factor, depending on where you're at in your life, at what stage you're at in your life, or what's going on. Modern day, a lot of stuff is done from home, a lot of work is done from home, things are being delivered, people just aren't out and about and socializing as much as they used to. So who knows? One of the benefits for you personally might be that, hey, there's someone hanging out here at the house. Think back if you in your younger days when you had roommates. It's almost always, at the very least, they were an acquaintance or friendly acquaintance, and someone to chat with in the evenings, whatever it may be. So don't sleep on that benefit as well. It may just be that, hey, now you've got someone there, an extra person. If you work from home, you don't really socialize a lot, you've got that option there. State and local law exemptions. So, like I said, if you are renting out a room in the home that you live in, you're sharing space with them, and so there are exemptions for you for certain laws. The first one to get out of the way, because it is a touchy one, you don't want to lean on this too heavily, but there are fair housing exemptions for owner-occupied homes, so that where you rent out space and you actually share indoor common area, like the living room, kitchen, bathrooms, things like that, to where if you have a very good reason, to where if for some reason you ended up in court, a judge or a jury of your peers would agree, yeah, reasonably that makes sense. You can actually legally discriminate based on familial status, as far as number of people in their household renting that room, or makeup, sex, sexual orientation, but it must have a solid, real reason. Like, for instance, the main one from all my research, I can see that these laws were created for, these exemptions, is safety concerns. So the prime example I could think of would be the single woman, or maybe even older, widowed woman, who she would doesn't feel safe, even if they come across as the nicest person in the world, doesn't feel safe renting to, a 250 pound, 40-year-old man. And so she would prefer to only rent to females because of her safety concerns. That's kind of the obvious one. Do not in any way try to use this for anything else other than like legitimate safety concerns that anyone else would agree with. The reason I say that is fair housing law is probably one of the strictest out there. And if you are caught even in a bit of a gray area, but you are found by like BOLI or HUD or possibly through a lawsuit from a tenant to be guilty in any way, these types of fines, legal costs in the $10,000 to $20,000 range is on the very low end. I've seen them get much higher and into the six-figure range. So definitely not something you want to play fast and loose with. But if you have a legitimate safety concern, like the example I said, it is a option out there that you can take advantage of. One thing to note on this is you are not allowed to advertise publicly what your preferences are as far as this exemption goes. That can still get you in trouble because of advertising. Fair housing laws don't have this exemption. But when it comes to screening, what you can do and kind of the process, like for instance that example, is she would get that application and the money for it, obviously. It would get turned in, and then she basically would return the application, refund the money without doing any of the screening, because obviously she knows, okay, since you're male, you're not going to fit, and then but basically say something to the effect of, due to safety concerns, I'm exercising my fair housing exemption rights to not rent to males. I do apologize for the inconvenience. Here's your application money back so that it did not cost you anything, as well as, maybe if you want to return the application, if they gave it to you physically with identifying documentation, or you can make a note that you shredded it or something like that, or something to that effect. But nonetheless, just let them know that's the stage that you do it. So you don't want to advertise. We will not rent to this particular group, but once you do receive it, you can return it. Make sure you don't keep any of their money or profit off of it in any way. And with that simple explanation of, hey, you did nothing wrong, but just due to my own personal safety concerns, I'm exercising my right to these fair housing exemptions to not rent to males, let's say, as far as my example was. If you tried to charge, $150, then if I'm charging $50, I'm going to get more tenants applying to mine, because it's just a little bit cheaper to test, see if they can get it approved. So the market also dictates what you're able to charge as an application fee. Who knows? It might be something where maybe you want to run some kind of a special and say, hey, if it's $40, $50 to apply, but if you're approved, that'll be passed on as a credit towards your move-in or something. Who knows? One thing I always try to tell people is if you give landlords a reason to compete against each other, we will happily do it and start doing specials and make it more affordable and more attractive for you to rent mine over yours, so to speak. So by all means, you can get creative if you need to. And the application fee is one of those areas that you can, as long as you don't turn a profit. Other Portland-specific exemptions: the Portland relocation fee exemption for owner-occupied units. So you may or may not know, but the city of Portland has a relocation fee that applies for your no-cause notices when you ask a tenant to move out, but they've done nothing wrong. And so you don't actually have to pay that relocation fee for the units inside your primary residence that you share a common area with. So because you do this, it does not make you exempt from this stuff for any other units you own, that you aren't sharing, that aren't inside your primary home. But you are exempt from this, and it is an automatic exemption, so you do not need to preemptively apply for the exemption through the Portland Housing Bureau like you do some of the other exemptions that are allowed. With that said, one thing that I always champion, because in all the years that I've been managing property, one of the services that I've always offered is basically a termination or eviction processing or handling service, to where basically, okay, if there's problems, you can hire me, and 90% of evictions I can handle it pretty smoothly. And vast majority of my cases, I'm typically able to work something out, with the tenant, whether that's peaceful move out, something like that. And one thing I can definitely tell you from the hundreds, maybe even thousands now, but probably still in the hundreds of situations that I've been hired to deal with, is a lot of times it's a communication breakdown. One of the things that a lot of times is a catalyst for a bad relationship between a landlord and tenant to develop and to divulge into things getting personal, and the tenant intentionally not no longer being helpful and stuff like that, even if it's within their legal rights. Things can change like that. A lot of it is surprise. The landlord that decides to sell their property that the tenant is living in, say single family home rental, and the tenant is never talked to about it, and they find out that it's listed for sale because they wake up one morning and there's a for sale sign in the yard, right? And so, like with this relocation fee exemption, you need to let them know ahead of time. Make it very clear before they rent it. Hey, just so you know, in case you're not up on the laws, if for some reason I decide, we need to do a no cause notice and ask you to move out when you've done absolutely nothing wrong, I'm not required to pay the city of Portland relocation fee like someone would be if you weren't renting a room in a home that they own, right? And so always let them know ahead of time. Make sure, and I'm going to talk more about this when we talk about leases, house rules, addendums, things like that. Really over communicate is the message that should be there. Make sure there's no way they can say I had no idea or anything like that. Make it very clear. Things like this, just let them know, hey, if you're renting this, great, it's probably cheaper than places that you don't have to share space with the owner, so you've got that benefit. But just so you know, there is this exemption to where if for some reason there's a no cause, you're not going to have that benefit of the relocation fee. Which also makes sense, because someone renting out a room in their home typically is not the traditional, large landlord with a lot of reserves, and it's definitely a more personal relationship, so to speak, or situation, I should say. No cause termination notices. You are not exempt from the 90-day requirement, so the city of Portland still requires 90 days for home sharing tenants at any time during tenancy. So if outside of the city limits of Portland, when I talk about the state exemptions, I believe here on the next slide, you're allowed to do either a 30 or a 60-day no-cause termination notice. But in the city limits of Portland, it is 90 days across the board. Speaking of the state-specific exemptions for no-cause terminations in owner-occupied units like we're talking about today, you have the option of a 30-day no-cause notice in the first year or a 60-day no-cause notice after the tenant has lived there for a full year. It is still 90 days within the city limits of Portland, though, if your rental property is there. And also I should say you are exempt from the state relocation fee that would typically come along with the no cause notice for any other unit that isn't one in the home that you are living. Quick note, no cause notices, those are really good to maintain there's a reason the lawmakers maintain the ability to do those without the relocation fee and everything for your situation. And that is sometimes a relationship just doesn't work, right? The tenant may not be doing anything wrong, right? But you guys just are really not getting along. Or it may be that it's your own personal home, life happens, you've got to do something else with it. Maybe you have no choice, you've got to sell it, or I don't know, maybe you've got to move, so you want to rent out the whole thing to a whole family or something like that. Who knows what it is? But since it's your own personal home, you didn't need that extra flexibility there. And so it is just that, it is a no cause notice. You do not need to put any kind of qualifying reason. It is not an official eviction. The tenant did absolutely nothing wrong unless they refuse to abide by it. and move out by the date on that note on your notice. But it is something that can be very useful. A couple other notes on that: you cannot serve a no-cause notice if it is during a fixed-term tenancy. So you have, as a landlord, you have a choice. You can rent it out as a month to month from the beginning. You can do it for a fixed term for a certain amount of time. Common is anywhere from 6 to 12 months, and then look at just letting it go month to month after that automatically, or possibly doing certain incentives and different levels of rent increases if you want the tenant to maybe be incentivized to sign another 1 full year commitment, or maybe you like it to just the flexibility of staying month to month. Either way, that is all up to you. Just know that if you do serve a no cause termination notice, the expiration date or the move out date on it, that is going to be, as we talked about, 30, 60, or 90 days later, that has to be on or after any fixed term lease time that you're in, on or after the expiration date. Okay. And these are minimum day requirements. Technically, if you wanted to, you could serve a 110-day no cause notice in the city of Portland, right? As long as it's not less than the 90. Just another quick note there on service of notice. When you dive into this, and I'll give you some resources here at the end, make sure that this is not the only class you take. I am covering stuff specific to your situation, just the stuff that is different and very unique for your situation of renting out a room inside the home that you live. There's a lot more to it because you are still a landlord, and all of landlord-tenant law applies to you except for, of course, the specific things we're talking about today. So for instance, service of notice. This is something you definitely need to know before you enter into one of these relationships. It's not complicated, but it is one of the many things that you do need to educate yourself on. And I do touch on it a little bit in some of those other free classes that the City of Portland pays for that we have there at rpmeducation.org. Quick refresher though, if you don't have a rental agreement in place, or maybe you created your own, or you didn't take my advice and use one from the local landlord support associations that create really good ones for you guys, then, and it doesn't talk about service of notice, then you only have two options. One is you hand it to them personally. Quite honestly, me renting a room inside my own home is probably one of the only times that I could actually see it being realistic that I might just fill out this notice and hand it to them personally, right? The other way that you can do it, which this might be a little bit strained for where going to the same place you live, is you actually take it down to the post office and through standard first class mail the official notice to them. If you do that, you have to add 3 days for mailing, and the day you put it in the mail does not count. So I always tell people, just as a good practice to make sure you don't accidentally miscalculate the wrong way and give them too little of notice and 1 day less or something like that, I always say just add 4 days. That way you're covered, right? Giving them 1 extra day, no risk whatsoever to you. Giving them one less day than they're supposed to have completely invalidates your notice. The other ways that you can serve it, and I'll just leave you with this, just to, something to go look up if you have these options. One is post and mail, where it's standard first class mail and also posted on the main entrance to their dwelling. In your case, that would literally be their bedroom door, because that's the entrance to their dwelling, because that's the private space that they are renting from you. Or if it doesn't have to do with termination, which these ones would, but if it's like a rent increase notice, or and maybe you want to do regular inspections of their room, things like that, just like a regular landlord, then those types of notices that have nothing to do with termination can be served via email. But there's a special extra addendum that you have to have signed after the rental agreement is signed in order to do that. So I encourage you to look up those ways. But like I said, I think if you're living there with them, I think the more informal ones, like maybe a notice of entry, even though quite honestly, if you're going to inspect the room, you can just get their permission and just talk to them and say, hey, I want to just take a quick look around, make sure there's no leaks, whatever. You can get their permission to do it at a day and time, which quite honestly, if you're sitting there chatting, it'll probably be right then, right? Who knows? But it is up to them at that point if they're giving you permission. If you had to, you could serve a notice by handing it to them. If it was a termination notice, and in any way I thought that there's some small chance that my tenant might try to challenge it in the future, right? Then that might be the scenario where in your situation, I might actually go the extra effort of adding the 4 days for mailing and taking it down to the post office, sending it standard first class mail, as well as if you read any of my stuff or take my classes when I talk about this, as well as pay for what's called a certificate of mailing to prove that you mailed it and make sure it gets postmarked that day, just so that you know everything is covered and you can prove it if you really thought it would go that route. Don't worry too much. You do want to document everything, want to do everything in writing, treat it like a business, but it's just like anything else. It's a very tiny fraction of a percent of the group that is considered tenants that are the bad apples that give all the other tenants a bad name. Same thing is true about the group that is landlords or any other group you pick. Typically, it's that little tiny fraction of a percentage that makes it bad for everyone else. And so odds are you're going to have a decent enough, at least a friendly acquaintance relationship with this tenant. You have super high odds of that, to where a lot of this stuff, like a notice of entry or something, or whatnot, can be handled by just handing them the official notice and having a conversation with them. All right, best practices for home sharing landlords. So those were all the exemptions, right? And then I wanted to cover a bit on just certain best practices, got little tips that might be my advice for you might be just a little bit different than, say, the real estate investor landlord that has, other units, even just 1 or 100, that they isn't in the home that they live, right? First, proper screening is essential. One of the absolute number one mistakes that I see landlords do, and I've been teaching these classes, and prior to COVID, vast majority, I was traveling all over Oregon teaching these types of classes for landlords. And now, majority are virtual, quite frankly. That's kind of the society we've become. Plus, it's a lot cheaper, and those associations around are nonprofits, and every penny saved is worth it. But I used to go around, and so I had a lot more interaction. But one of the number one things that I see go wrong is skimping on the screening. Like, it is your one and only chance to find out as much as you can about this person before, in this case, if you're renting out a room in your own home, before you make a pretty serious commitment to this person, right? Whether you like it or not, it's a relationship. And if you're renting out a room within your own home, it's a pretty intimate one, right? Obviously, professionally. But so you want to actually do the full screening. I hear from, gosh, it feels like, and I might be wrong, and maybe it's, just the ones that I end up running into or that end up talking about it because they're the ones that end up having the bad stories. But it feels like there's like 30% of owner landlords out there that own and manage their own stuff that will review all the screening stuff, but don't actually pull the public reports. They just review the documentation and the application. Do a full screening. Use a reputable third-party company to pull the public records. There's a lot of them out there, honestly. I don't have a recommendation of one over the other. A lot of what they do, if you are just getting the information, just their public reports, then quite honestly, I personally think any of them will do. They're going to give you a credit report, a criminal report, civil court report, which will show evictions and things like that. Just shop around. Whatever one you like is probably going to be fine if that's the level you're doing. If you want a little bit higher level, because there's services out there now where you'll actually give them your screening criteria. They'll collect the application fee via a link that you give out, and then they will actually give you a score based on your criteria, saying, okay, yeah, they should be or shouldn't be denied or approved, right? You can't profit off your screening fees. I already mentioned that, but just to reiterate, do not look at collecting application fees as a way to profit. Review all details of the reports, right? Like, for instance, a credit report. don't just look at the score. Quite frankly, in my own property management company, I don't mention credit score at all in my screening criteria. I mention all kinds of things that could be on the credit report. Like for instance, an automatic denial within my company is if they have an open collection account with a past landlord and they can't show me proof that they've been making payments and taking responsibility for it, right? That may or may not drag down the credit score, because a tenant debt, technically, if all the paperwork is filed properly along the way, it could stay live for 20, 21 years on their credit report. And so plenty of time for it to come up and the score to come up and it still be on there, right? Or on the flip side of that, someone who recently went through a foreclosure, right? They're previously a homeowner. They had a pretty good pride of ownership, right? Or if you're renting out a room, something that I could see becoming, common, someone who recently went through a divorce or something like that. Who knows what it is, but maybe, because of the foreclosure or a bankruptcy, their credit score is horrible, but they actually do really care about that stuff. They're rebuilding their life. They've got good employment, right? Then it might be that, maybe the low credit score is a reason for you to require some additional security deposit to offset that extra risk. But a low credit score isn't necessarily a reason to straight up deny someone. So really dig into it and review all the details of those reports, because they do tell us more of a story than just the caption you'll get at the beginning, right? Especially since you are renting out to a room inside your own home, meet them in person. I would argue you should probably require this, which you are allowed to do, that they have to come see the place and actually meet you in person before as part of the screening process, if they didn't just naturally want to do a showing, right? I recommend this even for regular landlords, but I would say for regular landlords that are renting out places where they don't live, that it can be optional, because there are certain tenants that are moving from out of state or something like that you might miss out on. That are really good tenants that you might miss out on if you require they travel here and meet you before renting to it. But if I was renting the room down the hall from me where I sleep, I would definitely want to meet the person first. So do it. Go through those steps. Be personable. Ask them about their life. And then my best advice, you're doing the showing, or you're talking to them on the phone. Be personal. Ask them about their life. And then the best advice I can give you as far as screening goes in the conversation part is be quiet. Let them talk. People like to tell their whole life story. And if they want to tell you about this, that, the other thing, great, let them. Because the whole point of this is for you to get to know them, right? You should also want them to get to know you and have an idea of what the house rules are going to be and things like that. But if you naturally are the type of person, maybe you're like me or someone I know who teaches classes in a one-way communication format and never has anyone interrupt him professionally. So you may have to consciously go, I should stop talking. I should let them talk, because it sounds like they're telling me how they ended up here, or why they're renting a room, or what happened in the last couple of years of their life, or whatever. Let them talk. Right? The more that you know about them, the more confident you will be when you approve that person to share your home. Let's see here. Oh, yeah, there you go. Look at me. I was actually saying what was on the slides and wasn't even reading it. Look at me go. Let's see here. And then, like I said before, I touched on those fair housing exemptions with screening. Only use those if you really feel there's a strong, safety concern or issue, something to that effect. That can come in the screening process. Like I said, you just refund their money, let them know, hey, because of safety concerns, I'm exercising my right to be exempt from the fair housing laws, and I'm, not renting to, say, you're the single woman, males, but don't lean on that. Like I said, it is, make sure you've got a solid reason if you go down that route. And that is not to scare you or because I'm necessarily on anyone's team here, so to speak. It is the main thing I don't want to see are perfectly well-meaning landlords end up in court and end up, getting successfully sued over things like that. Just especially if they got the idea from one of my classes. So tread lightly. It's not there to be abused, but it is there, as a little bit of a safety benefit for certain landlords that may need it. So when you create rental agreements that are legally compliant and clearly outline expectations, remember what I said, one of the biggest problems is surprises for tenants, not, feeling like they're blindsided by something. The only solution to that is not just communication, but over communication. Make sure you've got a good rental agreement. Make sure you've got all your addendums. Make sure, and we'll talk about it more here in the coming slides. Make sure you're doing, create your house rules and everything. So make sure you're using clear written agreements to specify the rent, what the house rules are, the privacy policies, and termination procedures aligning with Oregon laws and local ordinances to prevent disputes. Make sure you are incorporating legal clauses and disclosures. If you go to those form stores, you'll see there's the lease or rental agreement, right? Those are interchangeable words, just so you know. But there's also addendums, depending on the situation. Right? If you're going to require it be a non-smoking household and have strict rules on that, there's a smoking addendum, right? And things like of that nature. Ensure those agreements include required disclosures, any pet policies, any maintenance responsibilities, and are adapted to owner-occupied property exemptions and local regulations. Bringing up pet policies, I'm not going to go into it in this class, but I promise it does get covered in multiples of the other classes that I teach there at RPM Education. So I do look into it, but when it comes to therapy or assistance animals, outside of a real health hazard, like a serious doctor recognize, serious allergy or something, you do still have to follow all those same rules there. So make sure you do look into all of that. And communicate. Don't just hand them this stack of documents and say, great, in order to get your keys and to set the move-in time, just sign this and we're on our way. And then you know what they do, like all of us do, because they're human. They flip through looking for the initial spots and the signature spots. Do it. Great. I'm excited. Let's move in. Right? No, you are sharing your own personal space with these people. Make sure they do understand it. You don't have to be, aggressive about it, but go, okay, we're going to do the lease signing. Let's sit down. And before you slide it over to them, maintain control of the paperwork and basically flip through each page and talk about the things that are important to you. I wouldn't say you need to read them the whole lease word for word. By all means, they can do that on their own time. But there's going to be certain things that are very important. Like you want to make sure they do understand no smoking means also no smoking on the back porch, if that's what your rules are. Or maybe let them know, hey, it is no smoking, but if you or your guests want to smoke, honestly, as long as you clean up after yourself, I'm fine with it on the back porch. Whatever your rules might be, and go through and highlight the really important stuff. If you do an addendum with specific house rules, which I think would be a good idea with this type of situation, and I'll talk about that more here in a bit, make sure that's for sure one of the things you go over, right? So establishing those house rules that promote safety, privacy, and respect among tenants. So when it comes to house rules, as far as the law is concerned, you do have a lot of leeway. Like for the most part, you can come up with any house rule you want as long as it doesn't violate the tenant's rights. You probably shouldn't tell them, hey, you've got a 1 hour window to use that bathroom. Right? No, if it is a habitability requirement that they have access to a healthful way to dispose of waste, clean themselves, healthy water, all of that stuff. So you don't want to go that extreme with it, but you can have quiet hours. Let's say maybe 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. or something like that, or whatever it may be. If you work from home and you work from home from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m., then maybe that's kind of included in there of, hey, during these times, at the very least in this portion of the house where I'll be able to hear and it'll be disruptive in my office, it's, consider quiet time or something like that. But clear communication, again, of those house rules and expectation. Create detailed house rules covering the noise, shared spaces, guest policies, right? Any pet regulations, and that includes, maybe it's a no pet place, but you want to have a house rule for what if my friend who has a dog just stops by, right? Is it just a strict, absolutely not, needs to stay in the car, or would you be okay with letting it in the backyard? and so they can hang out together, and the dog will be there or something like that. So it's just little things like that you want to try and think of. Communicate these rules clearly to tenants at move-in. Ensuring privacy and legal rights of tenants. So respect the tenant's privacy by providing proper notice for entry, adhering to laws, and avoiding discriminatory practices during rule enforcement. So one thing that you'll need to do is make it so that they can lock their room, right? They have a right to have that. That is their private space that they are renting. By law, when you rent out, whether it's a room or another unit in a building or a single family home or anything like that, by law, that tenant, what that rental agreement gives them is legal possession of that property or of that space. So technically, they own possession of their room that they are renting. Excuse me. Now, this does not mean that they have any kind of ownership rights, like if you sold it or anything like that. That is what basically makes it to where you can't legally just walk into their room. Plain and simple. You need to be invited by them, or you need to serve a proper 24-hour notice of entry, right? Most of the time, you're going to be invited because you're probably going to have at least a cordial, relationship with them, to where it can be just an invitation thing of like, oh, hey, yeah, I wanted to check because there's a lot of times there can be a leak over on that side of the house. I just wanted to pop in, look up in the corner of your closet or whatever, or something like that. Or you just establish at the beginning so it doesn't feel weird later on. Maybe when they sign the lease, you say, hey, once a year or once every 6 months. That's probably about the frequency that's, most common, right? I'm going to be walking through, checking out the whole property, and I want to be able to go through yours. So I will be, just so you know, giving you an official notice of entry, or getting your permission, via email or text or something like that. It can be verbally too, but personally I like email or text so I can prove it later if I have to. And that way, they know before moving in, hey, just so you know, I'm treating this like a real rental, to where you have your rights, I have mine. I do want to come in. I'm not looking to go through all your personal stuff. I just want to make sure there's not some leak that you haven't noticed. Make sure there's not like some mold growing behind your dresser that you don't know about or something like that, right? So make sure there is a lock on their door so they can actually lock it. There's kind of some debate on whether or not a deadbolt is needed, or if just the handle lock is needed. If you don't want to do both, I would say, why not go ahead, throw in a deadbolt style lock, because then you're just covered, right? Just make sure the key portion is on the outside and the hand opening is on the inside, right? Let's see here. And then obviously they get a key. You do get to keep a copy of a key. Just the only time you can ever enter that room without their permission or them serving a notice is an emergency. And the best guide I can give you for emergency is it fire? Like there's a fire in their room and smoke is billowing out through the cracks of the door, right? Or you see it through the window outside. Flood. Somehow, some way, they have a water source inside their room, and there's just, you're actually witnessing water outside of the room, and so you go in to check it out. Or blood. You hear some things like, oh, they injured themselves, right? Now they're silent, or maybe they are giving you permission by yelling for help, telling you to come in. Or you literally see blood. Maybe their door is open. Even if their door is open, you can't just walk in without one of these things. And you see that they're on the ground bleeding, maybe unconscious. Absolutely, you can go in. But outside of that, fire, flood, or blood, you need their permission or to serve a notice. And they have a right, technically, and look into more details. Hopefully the relationship never gets to this. Technically, they do have a right to refuse entry as long as they make a reasonable effort to reschedule, right? Within a reasonable amount of time. Odds are you're not going to have to deal with something going that far south. It's, like I said, it's typically rare. But do know that you need to follow those rules to make sure you are abiding by their rights. And one thing I always tell landlords is I am very strict about the rules, the lease, and state law and the tenant responsibilities part of our laws, that it is followed to a T. But I back it up by making sure I am following everything to make sure I am not infringing on those tenant rights at all as well. And so I always tell landlords, you can be as strict about them following your rules as strict as you are about following the rules you're supposed to and dealing with them. So serve those notices, document everything properly, right? Regular updates and enforcement procedures. Review and update the house rules periodically. It might be something to where maybe just, in that once a year inspection that you do, you also go through and go, hey, it seems like you're having a little bit of trouble with this house rule. You know what? I wouldn't mind changing a little bit here. Or, hey, this really isn't working. We need to figure out a chore schedule. That's another thing. You keeping those. Oh, I talk about it on the next slide too. But yeah, creating kind of, a common area chore schedule. That can be part of it too, right? Unless it's just all on you. And that's one of the benefits of renting the room from you, right? But yeah, establishing fair enforcement policies and document any violation to maintain a harmonious living environment. Document everything. One thing I always try to say is, assuming you are a honest and moral landlord, then you're not intentionally doing anything wrong, then there's no such thing as too much documentation. Document everything, do everything in writing. Kind of an informal way to make sure everything is documented is email. I love email. I know slowly but surely it's going out of favor, but quite frankly, it's the easiest to search, it's the easiest to organize, and it had time and date stamps everything, But nonetheless, document everything, communicate. Management responsibilities for renting rooms. Maintaining the shared spaces and tenant safety. So ensuring the common areas are clean, functional, and meet habitability standards, prioritizing tenant safety and comfort. So something to point out here, technically, the way that you should look at this, and this is also the way that kind of, a lot of laws look at it too, is you've basically turned your home into an apartment complex, and the hallways and the living room and the kitchen are common space. So traditionally, it would be pretty traditional or normal that there's a base level of expectation that tenants clean up after themselves. They're not just throwing trash places, and if they spill something to stain things, of course they're held responsible. But the general, regular, ongoing cleaning maintenance, right, is on the landlord or ownership. So pretty common. With that said, it is a roommate situation. Like, you're human beings. You can have a conversation, you can have house rules, you can come to a mutual agreement of, hey, I would like to share, the cleaning responsibilities. If you're the type of person where you don't necessarily have any big cleaning hang-ups, right? You just want help, you don't necessarily care where it's at, then I found a great way to start this conversation is asking that tenant, hey, is there anything you really just can't stand doing? For some people, and one of them, bathrooms. For other people, it's dishes or taking the garbage out, or who knows what it is. It's, odds are it's the thing that their parent was super strict and made them do all the time when they were a kid, right? But maybe open it up with that. Is there anything you absolutely don't want to do? Find out. Because if it's something that you're like, oh, I don't care about that, great. Here's what we'll do. I'm going to start off by, I'm taking that chore. So then you don't have to do that. How about the dishes? Maybe we split that up, since I'm going to take care of, the overall vacuuming and dusting. Maybe that's something that someone just either doesn't like, or they're just not good at. If I'm going to be doing all of that, maybe you do the dishes 3 days a week or 4 days a week, and I'll do the dishes 3. Whatever it is, you're human beings. You can come up with an agreement to cohabitate. Or if you want, you basically just do the basic, the dusting, the vacuuming, some mopping and the basic cleaning maintenance, and then everyone's on their own for their own messes. So if you have dirty a dish, wash it, right? If you have a dishwasher, then here comes, who's emptying it. It's good to have conversations about this. Odds are in, 90+% of relationships that you're going to have in this type of situation, you're going to naturally people are going to take care of things. Right? No one likes doing chores, but majority of people do feel a little bit of urgency if they're sitting there doing nothing and someone else is cleaning up their mess, right? Another thing on there is when it comes to habitability standards, right? You are still a landlord, right? There are exemptions that we talked about, but you're still a landlord. So there are requirements that you have. One thing is, do you have the emergency heat source, right? So odds are you've got a furnace, if we're talking, a modern house, as your primary heat source, or maybe like electric wall heaters or baseboard heaters or something like that, right? And which is great, but sometimes those things break, right? If it's a furnace and it goes out, it might take a little bit to fix. Okay, so have an emergency heat source of some kind. If you've got a fireplace, make sure you've always got a stock of wood. That counts as a heat source. If you've got that pellet stove, that's not your primary thing, just make sure you always have some on hand. That might last you a few days at least, right? Or at the very least, will get you through a night, so that the next day you can go and buy more, however, depending on the situation. The other option is something that I do within my own management company is we have a stock of basically the largest indoor for residential use space heaters that Lowe's, Home Depot, your local hardware store carries. They're typically like, I want to say 2.5 feet tall, something like that. You got ones with, typically for your average, like say 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, right? We'll typically drop off like 2 of the oil-based ones, which are really good for long-term heat, but they take a while to warm up and do it. And then also a couple of the fan-based ones for the instant effect. And that's an extra emergency heat source, and it comes in handy, right? Just having those around, you'll end up using them. Another thing you might consider is maybe just, quite honestly, this is just good advice for if you own a home, especially if you start getting into rentals, is a dehumidifier, right? A few $100, you can have a decent dehumidifier, get one with an internal built-in pump, so that way it's not shutting off when you forget to empty the tank. Have one of those sitting around. Hopefully you don't have to use it for a burst pipe or whatever to dry things out and minimize the total damage and the cost for you, as well as save you from potential mold growth and it turning into a major health hazard habitability thing where all of a sudden you're renting an Airbnb or a short-term unit for you and your tenants or whatever. So have that dehumidifier. It also comes in handy just having it in the garage, right? You bring in the Christmas ornaments, turn it on for a night, and they're dry the next day, ready to be packed up. Understanding state and local laws, familiarize yourself with Oregon statewide regulations and Portland-specific laws to stay compliant. I can't stress this enough. This is a semi-part-time job, okay? No, you're not going to have to spend 10 hours a week on it. There might be some weeks where you spend a lot of hours on it if there's a repair you're managing, or in the screening and showing time you're spending some hours. But regular ongoing management, it's not a huge burden, but don't think it's nothing. At the bare minimum, join some of the local join a local landlord association, so you're getting their emails, their notices. Try to make it a goal. Maybe take like one class a month, just so you're slowly but surely and always keeping up on laws and rules, and you'll get reminded of something. You might be like, oh, I learned that 2 years ago. I totally forgot that I could do that, or that I'm not supposed to do that, maybe, right? But make educating yourself and staying up on the laws a regular thing, a part of your life. At a bare minimum, it needs to be a habit. Might even call it a slight semi-part-time job, right? Managing utilities and insurance requirements. So handling the utility setup, since you're already living there, it's probably already all set up in your name, right? Billing. This is something on the next slide. My wonderful friend, Mr. Portland Landlord, that I produced and created. I have a nice little video on that is going to explain to you all the different ways that you can pass on utility expenses to your tenant if you would like to. And insurance coverage to protect both landlord and tenants effectively. Yes, of course, you have a homeowner's policy because you live there, and it covers your own personal property and things like that. You know what it does not cover? It doesn't cover a liability. It doesn't have any liability coverage for your tenant if they're found to be at fault for some kind of coverable event. It also doesn't cover your tenant's personal property, right? So if you want to, you can require that they have renter's insurance. Just know there is a caveat there, and this is, like I said, this is a prime example why you need to always be educating yourself as a landlord. Unless the tenant happens to, their gross income is less than 50% of the area's median income, at which point you cannot require renter's insurance. You can suggest it, you can explain the benefits to them and why you think they should and how cheap it is if they go through their own auto insurance and whatnot. There's, depending on what kind of policy they have and how good of a driving record they have already, sometimes the multi-policy discount, once they add that, completely takes off what the renter's insurance costs, or it ends up costing like $5, $10, $15 a month. Is pretty minimal, considering the coverage they get. But yeah, if they're on housing assistance or home forwards paying for their rent, then I can guarantee you they're going to be under that threshold and you can't require it. But if they're making more than 50% of their area median income, you can. Be careful though, because if they're renting a room, I would say there's probably a good chance that they're under that threshold. Accessing resources and support networks. I'll touch on this one more time before we close out. I can't stress how important it is. Yes, as a unpaid volunteer, technically I'm a little bit biased since I run one of them, but I can't stress enough, and I'm not even going to try and say one is better than the other. Pick one, even join a couple of them. Maybe Multifamily Northwest, Portland Area Rental Owners Association, Rental Housing Association of Oregon. They're great sources. They're going to keep you updated on laws. They have all the forms that you'll need. They have the leases that you'll need, the rental agreements that you need. I'm not sure about the other ones. I'm sure they probably have at least like some Q&A classes or some way of offering specific advice. But like within the Portland Area Rental Owners Association one, you get unlimited access to the landlord helpline, to where you literally just have a question. Or like, what am I supposed to do here? Which form do I use? Hey, this is my unique scenario. I took that class, I watched that class online, but am I really exempt from this, or whatever it may be? So really utilize those resources, okay? Then they help immensely. I would argue probably you get help from them once a year, and it probably pays for your membership. Given if you're renting out rooms in your own home, you're probably going to be getting the entry-level cheapest membership they've got, right? Another resource, which is free, is good old Mr. Portland Landlord, a wonderful project that I've been working on since the end of 2025. The YouTube channel, it is free, Mr. Portland Landlord. He's going to go ahead and explain to you all the different ways that you can split up utility billing.
Hey folks, Mr. Portland Landlord here, chatting with you about something that comes up a lot when you're renting out rooms in your own home. How to split those utility bills fairly among your tenants. You know, nobody wants arguments over who used more hot water or cranked the heat higher, right? So let's break it down nice and easy. First off, the key is picking a method that's reasonable and sticks to Oregon law, where bills get divided based on stuff that actually ties to usage. One common way is by the number of people living there. Simple math, total bill divided by how many folks are under the roof. Say you've got 4 people total, including you. Each pays 1/4. Another option is splitting by the number of bedrooms. If there are 3 bedrooms and you're renting 2 out, those tenants cover 2/3 together, and you the other third. Or whatever split you agree on per room if they are significantly different sizes. Then there's square footage, which is my preferred option here for being precise, especially in those old Portland houses with quirky layouts. Here's the trick. You only count the private spaces, like each tenant's bedroom and any bathroom they exclusively use. Measure those up, add them for all tenants, and figure the percentage. For example, if one tenant's bedroom and bath total 100 square feet out of 400 total private square feet in the house, they pay 1/4 of the bill. Don't include shared spots like the kitchen or living room, since everyone's using those anyway. And hey, if a room's got a mini fridge sucking extra power, chat about adjusting for that. Keeps things fair without turning into a math nightmare. Whichever way you go, spell it out clear in your rental agreement from day one, and always base it on the actual bill. No padding for profit, or you'll run afoul of the rules. Oregon says it has to be pro rata, meaning reasonable and tied to real use, like from ORS 90.315. Oh, and if things change, give proper notice. What's your go-to method for splitting utilities? Square footage, head count, bed count, or something else? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear how you handle it. A big thanks to rpmeducation.org and the City of Portland Housing Bureau for the chance to contribute to this project. Great folks helping landlords like us stay sharp. And hey, head over to the Mr. Portland Landlord YouTube channel and hit subscribe for more free videos packed with helpful info for Oregon and Portland landlords.
Oop. Sorry, guys. Let's see. Okay. Oh, where is my mouse? There we go. All right. And the other thing on that is making sure that you pick a way to split up those utilities and you communicate about it. And you also include that in your rental agreement. You can have a utility addendum, or most rental agreements or leases that you purchase will have a utility billing section where you have a few different options and you can kind of fill it in properly there. The other part that I want to make very clear, if you do that, you get the bill as the landlord, right? You pay the full bill as the landlord, and then you calculate what the percentage is based on the route that you took to bill your tenant, and you invoice them, which you can send them an email saying, hey, this month here's a copy of the bill, your percentage is this amount, but you are required by state law to give them 30 days to pay. So it's a great way to make sure that they're covering the actual cost of utilities as they fluctuate, go up and down throughout the year. But just know that technically the tenant can take as much as 30 days to pay their bill, and that's perfectly fine. So you do basically become a utility or a company that is billing them to where, pretty standard and acceptable practice that is 30 days, and is actually state law in this case when it comes to utility billing or pass-through billing. So again, resources for landlord assistance and legal support, landlord helplines, legal aid programs, access local helplines through all the different local landlord support associations. Like I said, the Portland Area Rental Owners Association, Multifamily Northwest, as well as the Rental Housing Association of Oregon, or RHA Oregon. And I can't stress enough how important that is. It really does usually use their help once in the year, and it more than pays for it. Especially when you consider your other option, possibly paying an attorney for a legal opinion. Key forms and educational materials. Utilize those legal forms, guidelines, handouts from Oregon landlord associations and local jurisdictions to ensure compliance. And again, I can't stress enough, check your local laws. I covered state of Oregon, which applies everywhere. And I also covered for City of Portland specifically, since obviously they're the ones paying the bill and producing this video. But if you have rental properties, if you're outside of the city limits of Portland, you're in other areas, there's not a lot of them, but some will have additional rules, possibly different exemptions, things like that. So I strongly urge you to follow my advice. Treat educating yourself as a landlord as an ongoing thing that you don't have really a choice of, you need to do, and look into all those different options. And if you're here taking this class because you are thinking about taking advantage of the City of Portland Home Sharing Pilot Program, the web page for you to find out all the information on that is there on your screen, as well as will be in the class slides, class materials folder. Be sure to check that out and to get all the exact details of that program. We ended up not including the exact parameters, the requirements, and all the benefits that you get from it in this class, simply because it's a pilot program, so they may change some of the stuff or some of the minute details in the future, and we want this video to be relevant for as long as possible. So make sure, if you are interested in it, or if you didn't even know about it, hey, there's a home sharing program where the City of Portland, where you get some certain benefits, certain financial subsidies if your room rental qualifies under that program. So go to portland.gov/phb/homes-sharing-pilot-program to find out all of that information. Continue your landlord education. I mentioned it many times, but rpmeducation.org. We've been for quite a few years now. We get a grant from the City of Portland. It is funded by the Rental Services Office, and those funds come from the per door registration fee that City of Portland landlords pay every year, which FYI, if you're renting out a room in your home, make sure you check with your tax accountant because you are now a business within the city limits of Portland. Odds are you're not bringing on enough money to actually go over the limit and have to pay the city of Portland business taxes, but you are probably required to have a city of Portland business license as well as file, I believe it's the Schedule R city of Portland tax form, which if you're just renting a room in your house, odds are you're going to file it and let them know I didn't pay any money, but here's my rental registration fee, and you're all set. But check with your tax person on that and make sure that you are following all of those rules. With that said, part of those funds goes towards paying for these 5 free classes. We teach these 5 classes 5 times throughout the year. So if you go to rpmeducation.org, you will see these classes on the upcoming schedule, amongst, of course, all of our other classes that cost money because the city didn't pay for those. And if you go to there's a class video store, we also have all of our paid classes as well as all 5 of these free ones in there as a pre-recorded video ready for you to watch for free, paid for by the City of Portland and the Rental Services Office within the Portland Housing Bureau. And it covers a lot, not everything. There's a lot of stuff you'll see if you start to get into classes and everything. There's a lot to learn as a landlord, but don't let that scare you. This class plus if you go and take the time to watch these 5, you'll be leaps and bounds ahead of vast majority of landlords when they first start out. So things like marketing applications and screening laws and best practices, inspections and repairs, how to manage those. This isn't a class I'm teaching you how to how to do the work. This is how to manage doing all the proper inspections, move in, move out, stuff in between, as well as how to manage repairs, manage contractors, things like that. Rent increases and no cause notice terminations, tenant violations and for cause terminations, and move out process and security deposits. So access those. They're paid for by the Portland Housing Bureau through a grant from them every year. And so definitely go take advantage of that free education. And of course, while you're there, check out our paid classes, all the other education we have and resources we have there for you to go through. Like I said, being a landlord, whether you like it or not, it is an ongoing job. It's not passive income unless you're hiring professional help to just take care of everything for you. City of Portland resources. If you have a rental property within the city limits of Portland, you should definitely have the Rental Services Office webpage bookmarked. It's just portland.gov/RSO. If you go into there, you have links to all of our free classes. There's resources like the legal disclaimers you have to include with some notices. There's great information and education on the F.A.I.R Ordinance and the relocation fee ordinance within the City of Portland. And they even have a email address to where if there's some City of Portland specific, landlord tenant based, and you've just got a question, I was actually surprised. I sent one off to them at one of our, with the Portland Area Rental Owners Association. A landlord called the helpline with a question. I was like, I think I know the answer to it, but it's technically not written into law. So I need to ask, I'm not sure exactly how the city would view this. I think it was like in our situation where they viewed it as a no cause notice or possibly a for cause and whether it triggered the relocation. And we emailed them and they got back to us the same day. I think it was like 3 hours later. Like we emailed later in the day. We heard from early afternoon. I'm not going to put them in the hot seat and say that you can count on that always. When they first started and were figuring things out, I'm sure staffing was an issue. Also, I'm sure the volume of questions was way higher. It was days. But they're pretty quick to get back to you. One thing to note also, so I don't put them in hot water, they cannot give legal advice. They can tell you what the law is. They can tell you if they know how the City of Portland has interpreted something before. What they cannot do is actually give you advice on how to handle something, right? So if you do get a response that is a little bit cagey or maybe is like, hey, I can't actually tell you that, but hey, go maybe look up something like this. That's probably what you need to research, or even if they just simply say, I can't actually answer that, then odds are it's because they honestly would be violating the rules of their employment if they gave legal advice, right? And so absolutely use them. They've proven to be a great resource, but do understand that they have their own rules they have to follow. So it might be something where you start there and then you find out, okay, there's obviously something more to this, and then you go to that rental owners association that you joined, and get the full scoop, so to speak. So. All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time. Make sure you go to rpmeducation.org. Make sure you save the portland.gov/RSO website and do your research. Make sure being a landlord is a ongoing education project for you. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you at another class.